Hi everyone. Let's look at the connected assignments in English 1A and 149 this week. In English 1A, we have the Under the Influence discussion board, and this is based on Scott Russell Sanders' story, Under the Influence. And it's talking about this dramatic arc, and it's asking you a few questions surrounding that. So let's look at the handout called Analyzing Remembered Events, and look at this for a moment. Now, many stories, and not all of them, but some can follow this dramatic arc where we have an inciting incident, we have a rising action, a climax, falling action, and then a resolution at the end. Sometimes those stories are like happily ever after stories. There's some kind of situation that gets set up, there's a problem that arises, and then it gets resolved at the end. Now, this story might not necessarily have the happily ever after type of format. However, we can analyze it for elements of the dramatic arc. So let's look at this inciting incident first of all. This has to do with setting the stage for the story and then introducing some kind of initial conflict or problem. And I think in Scott Russell Sanders' story, this inciting incident really is introduced in the first short sentence when it says, "My father drank," because this story centers around Sanders' father's alcoholism and the impact it had on him as he grew up and even as an older man. So we can have next rising action, so there can be a developing crisis, a climax of the story. The falling action can be a start of this resolution of tension. And then in the end, there can be sometimes a resolution, but not always. But sometimes there's just instead more of a reflection on the conflict itself, the meaning that's drawn from it. So if we go to the assignment in 149, I'm going to have you look at each part of that in the story. Figure out what initial problem sets off the action, what crisis is developing that leads to complications in the story. What do you think the high point of the story is that marks a change for good and bad? And this can be subjective. As we read, we might choose different areas that seem like the high point to us. In the falling action, we want to see what kind of resolution of tension there might be. And then for this fifth question, I'd like you to write a summary. So it says, even if conflict is not completely resolved at the end of a story, what meaning is gained? For this question, I'd like you to dig a little deeper and write a brief summary that reflects on what the main character in the story learns. What has he gleaned from his decades of experience with an alcoholic father, and in what ways has it changed him? So summarizing is another good active reading strategy that can help you look a little more deeply at the text and gather meaning from it. And this question, of course, is directly related to one of the questions in the discussion board, so that will help you to answer that question also. In addition, let's take a look at the sensory description handout, because this is also a question that's included on that discussion board. So sensory description is a very good tool that writers can use in their stories because it paints a vivid scene for readers. It uses the senses, the element of touch, smell, hearing, sight, etc., to draw readers into the moment and describe what that moment was like in terms that we can understand, because we have these senses that we experience the world through. So if you look at Sanders' story here, you can really see this sensory description at play right away in this first paragraph. He says, "This is how the story ends for my father, age 64, heart bursting, body cooling and forsaken on the linoleum of my brother's trailer." So here we have a description using sight that's very vivid. We also see his father tipping back the flat green bottles, brown cylinders of whiskey, his Adam's apple bobbing, the liquid gurgling. This one is an auditory description. So all these kinds of description come into play to really give a clearer picture of this writer's experience in this situation, and makes it much more vivid and makes it come to life. So you'll be examining this story also for these elements of sensory description and how they're used. So this is pretty straightforward, this assignment this week. You'll just be answering those questions and writing a brief summary for that final one. I hope this helps you, and please email me or get in touch with me if you have any questions.